Hello everybody. Today we will be solving Leetcode 2109, adding spaces to a string. We are given a zero index string s and a zero index integer array spaces that describes the indices in the original string where spaces will be added, or in other words, inserted. Each space should be inserted before the character at the given index. So for this example here, this capital Y happens to be at index 5, which means we will insert a space where that capital Y used to be and shift everything over to the right. This number 9 for spaces happens to be where this capital C is originally in the original string, which means that at that location we will insert a space and shift everything beyond that point to the right. Hence, this will be the resulting string. I think this problem is pretty straightforward. There isn't much else needed to understand and solve it. So I think I will now move on to discussing how I'll implement it. All right, so let's get started here. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll loop through so let's loop through the index and the character of our string of s. Inside the loop, we will compare the index of the string and the space index. So we'll need a special variable, which is space index, and we'll call it, for now, 0. But we don't want to compare it to the space index. We want to compare it to this value stored at that space index. So we'll call this space index. I hope that makes sense. If this is true, then we can insert a space, and then we can increment our spaces index because we've used it. Now we can move on to the next one. So let's increment space index. If these are not equal, we can add that character to the string or our temporary result. So let's add character to result. One thing to be aware of is that in Python and most languages, strings are immutable, meaning you cannot adjust a string. You cannot insert anything. You cannot change a character. So what we'll be doing is converting our original string into a list of those characters. So we'll just call this for now result, and this will store our temporary result, and at the end we'll have to convert our result to a string. And that's basically the gist of the approach that I'll be using. And I think that's enough to get started, so I will. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll use a result to keep track of our temporary result. And then what we'll also do is we'll need to keep track of the spaces index, which I will call j, and L will be the length of spaces. So this will equal 0 and the length of spaces. Now let us loop through the string that they give us. So for the index and the character, enumerate s. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we'll compare the index and this space index to determine if we need to insert a space or not. So if I equals spaces j, that means we are to place a space at that location. So result dot append a space. Now we're done with this j, so we need to increment it. So j plus equals 1. And now we should append the character that was there previously. So result dot append character. Suppose now, notice how we're incrementing j, our spaces index. This is now at the end of spaces. At that point, we don't need to continue on with this loop anymore, so we can exit. So if the spaces index, which is j, equals the length of spaces, which I've set to L, then we can break. So, but potentially though, as described here, if our last spaces index value or last spaces value is 9, which would be here, we would be left with coffee. So my point is, we may potentially have a remainder of the string left. So we'll need to keep that in account, or take that into account as we return or formulate our result. So let's go back. So where do we leave off at? Well, I is the last character we added. So we need to add the remainder. So the remainder would be s at I plus 1. And this may or may not exist, but we need it there just in case. Now we'll need to add it to the result that we have so far. So dot join. So we're converting this result of a list of strings into just a string. Dot join result plus, and we'll just return this, and let's check it locally. Okay, looks good. Time to submit. Okay, looks good. Now, I will offer what I think is a better approach, and it comes down to this understanding. For the most part, let's look at this again. Look at these test cases. The length of the string compared to the length of the spaces. This is only 3, but this is much bigger. I'm not sure how long it is. It doesn't matter. Maybe 15. Same thing, maybe here that's 12, and this is only 4. This is maybe 3, 6, 7. This is also 7. My point to you is this. Spaces, the spaces array, most likely will be less. The length of the spaces array will be less. So we can use that to our advantage as we develop an algorithm. So my point to you is this. Instead of looping through S, again, which is much longer, we know that. S will almost always be longer than spaces, but it will never be shorter than spaces. It will never be shorter than spaces. So let's use that to our advantage. So let's reset this, and let's see what we can do here. So what I'll do here is I'll use, well, let's go through this. For j in spaces, Now this will be the space index. So this will be, for example, this will be the 5 and 9 from that previous example. So what we'll do here is say, well, sorry, I need to set some things up. I and result. So I will be the index of the string that we're at. So I equals 0, and result will be an empty list. So for this first spaces, we'll compare it, we'll add the string up to that point. So result dot append s I to j. So let's go over what that means. So for this first example, let's clear it out over here. What is it? Let's use this one here. So what we have here is this, on this first loop, since j is 5, we will have appended s from 0 to 5, which will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which will be enjoy. That will be in our result so far. And then we will set I equal to j. Next, we will append, so that we will keep doing that all the way through. So at the end, sorry for the next loop then, our next loop, now j will be 9. So our result will be, so first it has enjoy in it. Now I is j, so now that means I is 5. So that means we will be inserting this here. We will be inserting 5 to 9. 5 to 9 is, for the string, will be, so 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which will be your. So this gets appended to our result. So now it looks like this here. So now we have this, enjoy your. Okay. Once we've finished spaces, now notice spaces only had 2 elements in it. So we're done looping through spaces, which is much quicker than when we looped through each character in our original string. And then we can append whatever is left over. So whatever is left over is I. So no problem. So well, that means we'll use this syntax to indicate we want the remainder from I onwards. So now at this point we'll have coffee. And now hopefully you see what we're going to do next. We're just simply going to join them on a space. And we are done. Now, I think I like this approach easier or better. I think it's simpler, mainly because we know spaces will most likely be shorter than the string. I don't know if it said that here, but we know it's mostly going to be true. Yeah, here it is. Yes, we know it's, yes, at the most spaces I will be less than the length of the string. Okay, so great. Now let's check if this approach made an improvement. First, let's check if it works. All right, well, let's clean that up first. Where did I mess up? Invalid syntax. Oh, horrible. My apologies. Okay, works locally. Let's submit it. Okay, looks good. So I I feel better showing you two approaches. I think as developers or engineers, the more approaches we know make us better engineers. If you liked it and it was beneficial to you, please like or subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Take care.